I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Richard Hodes. Dr. Hodes is director of the National Institute of Aging, or NIA, at the National Institutes of Health. The NIA is the principal federal funding agency for studies of the basic clinical, epidemiologic, and social aspects of aging, including the Pepper Center program. Dr. Hodes has been director of the NIA since 1993, and he informed us today he's the second longest standing director of an NIH center. Dr. Hodes' visit to Yale represents a coming of home of sorts since he received his bachelor's degrees here in 1965 before heading up north to Boston for his medical training at a school not to be named. Dr. Hodes is a diplomat of the American Board of Internal Medicine. In 1995, he was elected as a member of the Dana Alliance for Brain Initiative. In 1997, he was elected as the fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In 1999, he was elected to membership in the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences. As author of more than 250 research papers, he's an influential scientist in and contributor to the field of immunology, and he's been an outstanding and tireless leader of the NIA. Tomorrow, Dr. Hodes will be meeting and interacting with many of our faculty and trainees in several different forums, including a scientific poster session. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hodes back to Yale.
Well, thank you very much for the chance to come back home. It really is a great privilege to be here and a pleasure to be following Congresswoman DeLauro. You know, she was talking about times past, which evoke, I think, a healthy kind of nostalgia. You can perhaps imagine from her descriptions the times not so many years ago when Republicans, Democrats, bipartisan members of Congress and Appropriations Committee would dedicate day after day to have come before them the directors of each of the NIH 27 institutes and centers, a chance to talk about the work that all of you were doing, to have it appreciated, to communicate to our policymakers the importance of what was happening. And as she's noted, we don't have those opportunities so much anymore, but we can all hope the day will come when we can once more return to that style of communication with our national leaders. It's a great pleasure to be here and to introduce or open this symposium. The title is rather pretentious. I hope I didn't really make it up. But what is striking, as you'll see, in a brief summary I'll give you of the way in which research is supported across NIA, the Institute on Aging, and some of the major areas of research, you'll see how closely it maps really to the presentations you'll be hearing. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Because it does reflect, as noted, the leadership in each of these major areas of science that you here at Yale have played. So let me talk about the major divisions of research support at NIA. The first in the Division of Aging Biology, as you can see reflected in the name, this is the area of discipline that look to understand what the underlying molecular, cellular, genetic basis is for aging. And as we'll turn to as a theme, I think, that crosses much of what we're doing, with the recognition that what is important for aging really underlies issues of health across organs, tissues, and lifespan. So there's a centers program which provides infrastructure, and then a series of programs in molecular cellular biology, genetics, immunology. We want to go on through all of the areas of basic science you know so well. In terms of a suggestion of the future and opportunities in this area, I would just highlight what was a very recent event last week held in Bethesda. And it was sponsored by a geroscience interest group. Now, geroscience is a relatively recent term, I think coined about 2007, give credit to the folks at the Buck Institute in California. And it reflects the fact that there is likely underlying relevance for the aging process to many of the conditions that accompany aging. And so by understanding the biology of aging, we in fact serve not just NIA's mission, but that across all of NIH, all those interested in health and well-being. This interest group presented a summit that was opened by Francis Collins, then had a series of keynote presentations that really spanned demographics, health issues, and underlying biology. You can see the session titles here. Dr. Dixit was one of the participants there in inflammation, but inflammation, stress, epigenetics, all these major areas underlying biology have been a part now of a geroscience interest group at NIH, which is now 20 NIH institutes strong, and the commitment of institute centers and directors to these missions. So our hope is, at a time when the budget is clearly constrained, when NIA and each institute has a great challenge in funding the outstanding research opportunities in each field, that we can increase the commitment and conviction that research relevant to aging is indeed relevant to all institutes and centers, and you'll be hearing some of this today. So if Sandy talks about telomeres and their relationship to biology, the connection to cancer will be there, and so this theme goes, I think, across areas of basic biology of aging. The Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology is the division that sponsors the more clinical aspects of aging research, and the Pepper Centers, the Older Americans Independent Centers, such as that here, are a part of the purview of this division. It has interest in some areas that are quite germane to aging as a process, such as menopause, some conditions that you'll be hearing about, such as frailty or increasing risks of comorbidities that are accompanying aging. But it really crosses, as you will see here, many aspects of disease, condition over an age span. And if there is a theme that I think is becoming more and more dominant in this area, and this is not just at NIH, but across NIH, it's one which Dr. Tonetti has certainly pioneered in emphasizing, that our focus, for understandable reasons, on individual conditions or diseases in isolation is important, but is failing if it doesn't account for the fact that multiple morbidities, the existence of multiple conditions concurrently, need to be addressed. This is clearly a theme across NIH, across other federal agencies and Medicare, Medicaid, and you'll be hearing some about that today too. Certainly, if we're picking one major thrust of the programs that's going to be supported by NIA and NIH in years to come, this is at the very top of the list. I want to note one interesting opportunity that's emerged at a time when funding is quite limited. The NIH budget is not going up. In fact, it's been decreasing of late. We're certainly looking for opportunities to collaborate, and one agency, one organization that appeared in the last 2 years is PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Many of you may be aware of it. It's a non-governmental agency. It's funded by a tax, if you will, on health care premiums, and it has a budget that is increasing year by year and looking for opportunities to invest in the kind of research that will be of interest, patient-centered outcomes being the key to what is being pursued, and happy to announce that the very first occasion of an investment of funds by PCORI in an NIH-supported clinical research study, in this case clinical trial, will be in a trial that was announced some time ago now with applications being reviewed, committing up to $30 million in support of interventions in partnership with NIH to prevent falls and injuries associated with falls in older Americans. So I think a sense of one of the top themes, the first, what we hope will be many such collaborations, and focus on an area that's been close to aging research and certainly close to the work here at Yale and at the Pepper Center. The Division of Behavior and Social Research is a third of our 4 extramural divisions that spans a wide spectrum of research from individual sciences such as psychology through the population sciences such as demography and economics. It has maintained a number of centers programs as well as studies that have, for the first time, characterized at a high level of specificity the longitudinal consequences of aging over time in terms of health, biology, but also behavior, finances, and social issues. One theme, which again I think will be related very much to what you'll be hearing today from the presentation that talks about the evolutionary conservation of social interactions, is the general theme reflected here in the rubric we call reversibility of early disadvantage. And the reason there's a non-human primate, monkeys in the picture here in a division of behavior and social research, reflects an increased understanding in the way in which behaviors are connected to physical and biological properties, be it epigenetic changes in DNA that reflect the outcomes of experience and exposure, but issues that are common to all organisms through evolution. And reversibility here reflects to the fact that early life experience, sometimes adverse, produces consequences which, if not interfered with, themselves can be quite negative. They can now, in very exciting areas of research, be understood in terms of both behavior but also the underlying or associated biology and epigenetics, and the ability to reverse such changes, holding great promise to try to devise interventions, be they behavioral or biological, to address and reverse outcomes of, in particular, adverse events that may have occurred earlier in lifespan. The Division of Neuroscience, a major, in fact, the largest of the 4 divisions, reflects the fact that NIA is the lead agency for research in Alzheimer's disease, although it's more than Alzheimer's disease that's being studied. It's changes that occur over time with age in cognitive function, but also in other sensory motor functions and functions such as sleep. And here I just want to outline for you some of the changes that have occurred in the past couple of years as a result of a national effort that has focused resources and attention on Alzheimer's disease in particular. The research has included a dramatic increase in understanding genetic contributions to Alzheimer's disease. We used to show one by one the genes that had been associated as risk or protective factors for Alzheimer's. And now I think we can much more productively show what is, I think, the future of such research, not just individual genes and names, which may not mean much to most of us or you, but the way in which these risk factors, the genes that affect Alzheimer's risk, fall into categories. The one you see first here with the greatest list of genes below it, innate immune response, brain inflammatory response, reflects a likelihood that with so many genes that affect the risk of Alzheimer's disease being related to inflammation, that it may be that pathways of inflammation affecting the brain are those targets where we will perhaps have earliest opportunity to intervene and have income. And similarly, across lipid transport, synaptic transmission, cytoskeletal, we're learning more and more about the way in which risk factors fall into patterns that suggest underlying processes, which we hope will identify targets that can be validated and then used for intervention. The National Alzheimer's Project Act was an act which was passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the President, a not-so-common occurrence these days, but which established a national plan to address Alzheimer's disease, and one important component of that was research. The areas of research were translated into priorities and a plan that it has milestones, all targeted to produce effective interventions by 2025, a stated goal. In science, it's hard to promise, and we make it clear that we're not promising in an area where we don't know what the course will be, but nonetheless a goal which motivates all of us. With budgets as restricted as they are, this is one area in which NIH director, with difficult choices to be made, was able to make additional funds available in 2012 and 2013 to carry out some incremental studies that would not otherwise have been done with available budgets. And I just want to stress to you the kinds of research and the excitement in it that are being carried out by some examples here. One is an approach to identify novel targets in Alzheimer's. You know, we're very effective at following areas of research that are promising and are undoubtedly important, but perhaps the greatest challenge is to force ourselves, motivate ourselves to look at areas that are not what is most apparent. And so this is an initiative that really asked investigators to respond with strategies for identifying new potential targets in Alzheimer's disease that were not the conventional ones. And the pattern of most of these studies is really in the opening of a very new and I think phenomenally interesting area of science based on network and systems analyses, mathematical analyses of large data sets that really has been possible only in the last couple of years, that have compared, for example, gene expression patterns or protein expression patterns or gene sequences in hundreds of people who either have Alzheimer's disease or don't, or where tissues expressed in various areas of the brain will have different such patterns, and from all of that to deduce the targets, the nodes for what appear to be the most important pathways in disease. And I think this is an example of basic science, investigator-initiated, that is going to open new opportunities in this area, coupled with the effort to increase our basic discovery science base. Have been some areas to translate what we already know as promising opportunities into clinical trials to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Now, sad to say, we've all been highly disappointed with the fact that the large clinical trials addressing Alzheimer's disease in the years through the present have been extremely disappointing. We have not yet had great success. I think there's a conviction, well-based, that a lot of this may relate to the fact that these studies were carried out generally in individuals who had advanced state of changes in the brain manifest by disease, a time at which substantial damage has been done, probably very difficult to reverse. So you'll see in the pattern of these studies that are being supported now an attempt to look earlier and earlier in the underlying course of the disease before symptoms even appear. And techniques such as brain imaging have been enormously successful in finding changes that in fact predict disease years or even decades beforehand. So we're now able for the first time to address interventions at this early stage before largely irreparable damage may have been done with, we hope, greater promise success. And so examples of some of the studies that are being carried out here, the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative, taking individuals who have the APOE4 allele, a strong risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, but who have not yet developed any symptoms, and beginning early to address therapies, in this case, therapies that target beta amyloid, to see if it's possible to prevent the advance to the clinical stage of disease. Similarly, I mentioned the growing body of evidence that inflammation in the immune system may be playing a role in the etiology of Alzheimer's. So stimulating the innate immune system, in fact, in this case with the GM-CSF, a hormone or a growth factor, to see if it's possible to head off the early stages of advance there. And similarly, the dominant inherited Alzheimer's network trial, just to point out there are tragic families with Alzheimer's disease determined by specific genetic mutations where Alzheimer's develops in the 50s, 40s, even 30s. Enormous tragedies, but with a lot to teach us about the underlying biology and with individuals who are desperate themselves for intervention. So trials such as this will actually begin to treat people 10 or 15 years before we know with certainty those individuals will develop Alzheimer's disease if not treated. Examples of opportunities that are arising these last years and give us a new hope for, in fact, making a difference in this very terrible disease. And let me just end with the slide illustrating the Brain Initiative. This is one that was announced with a great deal of fanfare by the White House that sets the enormously ambitious goal of over the next decade or so trying to understand at the level of individual neurons in the brain not only what each of them is doing, but how they connect with one another. Audacious is the word applied, I think, but it's likely to drive a new generation of neuroscience and advance that we hope will take us to areas of not just understanding of underlying biology, but an opportunity to see the targets by which we can increase the successful aging in the context of the session we'll be hearing about today, in the brain, in the rest of the body, in the mind, and the quality of life and its improvement, so that as we continue our success in extending lifespan, as you've heard expressed already, we can manage to make that lifespan of the highest possible quality of independence and good health. So I leave you with this as just an expression of the breadth of research in aging that we think holds great promise. You'll see, without coincidence, this is really typical of the cutting-edge work being done across the programs here at Yale, and I look forward with you to sharing the experience of hearing from the very talented leaders in the field who will be talking over these next hours. And thank you again for the opportunity to be back here with you.